Hello, this is Angela Anderson. Thanks for joining me today. In this video, I'm going to be showing you how I did this painting of a teacup with some roses. It was a Downton Abbey inspired painting, and I found the image off of a blog called Fab You Bliss. Stephanie Stahl, the creative director, allowed me to use it in this video, and the photographer, Julie Roberts, is who took the photo, and the links to her website and to Fab You Bliss are down in my description below if you want to check those out. So the first thing I did was sketched out my teacup, and it was kind of right down in the middle of my, a little bit below center on my square canvas here. And the front edge of the saucer is fairly thin, and then it's basically an oval shape underneath that teacup there. And there's just a little tiny bit of it showing underneath where it rests on the book. So keep that front edge fairly narrow when you sketch it, and then just try to keep your edges and your angles equal on both sides of it. The book angle here, it comes straight down from about where that edge of the teacup is, and the original image had 3 books, but I decided to chop off the bottom 2 so that I could do this on a square canvas because it just was easier to do in a video that way. Okay, so with the book, you just kind of want to make sure that your edges are parallel from each side and top to bottom. And then sketch in your roses. The front rose comes down over the top. I made the leaf a little bit smaller than in the photograph so that I could see more of the teacup. And then the bottom, or the top rose there, that red one, is just basically kind of an oval shape. And then part of it, the bottom part there, gets cut off by a smaller oval. And then a large, almost circular shape for the large cabbage rose in the back there, the pink one. And just kind of check your angles and check your flowers against one another. That's the best way that I've found to keep my scale correctly when I'm taking an image like this and I'm making it larger, is I will check, where the side of the teacup is compared to the center of the rose, compared to the flower above it, center, and the flowers around that. If you just kind of keep checking your angles and your placement, you can enlarge something and make sure that you keep your perspective correct, if that makes sense. So once I do this initial sketch, then I go back and start checking all of those angles and just making sure that I've got them all lined up correctly. The book was a little bit off, and actually when I painted it, that front edge, side edge of the book there was a little skewed down. I didn't get the angle correct in this initial sketch, and I ended up painting it that way, but I was able to correct it later. After I videotaped this, I kind of just corrected it a little bit, just brought up the color. So if that happens, don't worry. Acrylics are great. That way you can kind of correct them as you go. And I don't usually do a whole lot of hard sketches. This is about as detailed as it gets for me usually. But if you want to sketch in all your details really carefully and make sure you've got everything perfect before you start painting, you can do that on paper, and then you can kind of go and start transfer it onto your canvas and sections even. You can do your background and then transfer on your details over the top of your background and do it like that. So I do it both ways. If I'm doing a very detailed painting, sometimes I will do it on paper first and transfer it, but I generally like to just sketch straight onto the canvas like this and let it kind of develop as I go. So as you can see here, I'm starting to lay in that background. It's a soft green palette, so I'm using Phthalo Green and some brilliant yellow green, nickel Azo Yellow here. And some Unbleached Titanium to just going to lay in a very painterly background. Work wet on wet, so lay down a fairly thick coat of paint and then grab another color and blend that into it, and just work your way around the canvas this way and kind of go around your shapes and start to outline and develop your shapes of your flowers there. I went ahead and just ignored the greenery that was in the teacup, and I went ahead and put that in last, so I didn't want to have to worry about trying to paint around all those little fussy leaves. I also added in a touch of light ultramarine blue to kind of gray out the colors a little bit. You could also add a tiny bit of red into that if you really want to neutralize it even more, because the phthalo is a fairly vivid green color. So if you wanted a little bit softer, you could add a tiny bit of red and that'd tone it down. But I kept it fairly bright on mine. And I just kind of added different colors as I went around the outside edges. So, and then came back in with some Hooker's green there. I'm assuming the paint was named after the person who invented it and not the people who were using it at the time. I don't know. It makes you wonder. Probably didn't mean the same thing whenever this paint was established, I would hope. So anyhow, my kids' class, whenever I end up using this, they always giggle. So that yellow there is a color called, let's see if I can find it, Hansa Yellow Light. Now, if you don't have these colors, you can use other colors. You can mix your own blue or greens from, blues and yellows. You don't have to go buy my color palette. I'm just telling you what I used. And when I do my fine art paintings, I tend to like to lay out a lot of different colors so that I can move quickly and don't have to spend time doing a lot of blending. This color is Turquoise Deep. And it's a Liquitex color, but there's another color by Golden that's called Phthalo Turquoise. It's similar. I've added a little bit of burnt umber to it to do the shadow area. It kind of greens it out and darkens it up a little bit. And then for the front edge of the book, I've added some Unbleached Titanium to it. And that'll just kind of create a soft turquoise color. And I just let whatever's left in my brush kind of come out, so there's streaks of the darker color and the lighter color in there as I fill in. And this painting, the light source was coming from behind the teacup, so that front edge was in shadow, and then the top edge of the book will be highlighted. So the colors on the top of the book will be more saturated, and the ones down there on the spine facing us are going to be a little bit more dull and darker eventually. So I'm just kind of adding in some streaks here with some darker colors and laying in the edges of my book. Now I'm going to lay in my red rose, and that is Alizarin Crimson. If you don't have Alizarin Crimson, you could use a Cadmium Red or something like that. Alizarin is a little bit more on the purple side of the spectrum, so you could add a tiny bit of Magenta or something like that to it to make it a little bit brighter. That color there is light magenta that I've added to it, and I've also got some Cadmium Red Light. That's that orangey red color there. And I'm just using those to put in my undercolors for my pink rose. And I also added in just a touch of light ultramarine blue along that bottom edge to give it a little bit of a shadow color. And made my brighter area up toward the top center of that flower, since that'll be the darkest area. Now I'm just kind of working out, put a little bit of that color in the red rose, and just kind of working out my shapes to make sure that I've got that white rose blocked in correctly. Now I'm going to start my undercoat on the rose, and I'm using nickel Azo Yellow and some Unbleached Titanium. And I think that's raw Sienna up the top there too that I used. So just kind of a creamy, the white added into your yellows will help it be more opaque. I'm not worried too much about my lines. I'm just kind of trying to block in the main outline of it. It's important to do a darker background, especially with a color like white, because you need that contrast. Otherwise, if you just went straight in with white, there would be nothing for it to play off of. There would be no depth to your colors. So this undercoat really will help the top layers have a vibrancy that you wouldn't get otherwise. So now I'm using the Hooker's Green, and I still have that yellow on my brush, so it's kind of creamy, a little bit softened from that straight Hooker's Green. And I'm just filling in my darker areas of the greenery around my roses, a little bit on top of the yellow one there and to the side. There's just a little bit showing. And now I'm picking up some of my lighter green and some of that turquoise, and I'm making kind of an aqua. It's more on the green side, but I still have a lot of that yellow in there in my brush, so it's made it kind of a soft green color. And now I'm picking up some ultramarine blue with it, and with that green now it's making kind of a turquoisey color, lightening it up a little bit. And I'm laying my first undercoat in on the teacup and saucer. Laying in a few of the values. It'll be darker toward the bottom there, and then I'm picking up more white at toward the top of the teacup. Most of this will be covered up with other colors, but you'll still be able to see just a little bit of this kind of a soft aqua green showing through in some of the shadows and things. So the main color of the teacup was more of a cool blue, almost on the purple side, bluish white. So, and here again, I'm just kind of looking at the picture and trying to see what are some of the undercolors that I'm seeing. I'm seeing a little bit of green reflected off of the book, and the being that it's outside, it's picking up some of the greens from the, environment. That white will reflect off some of the colors around it. So I'm not worried too much about it. I'm just kind of trying to lay in my shape here and make sure that I've got my composition well placed. I'm laying in a little bit of the darker shadowed area there so that I can see where my rim is. And if you want to, this was a 3-hour video, so if you want to see this slowed down, you can go up into the little settings cog and you can hit the slow. I can't remember. I think that there's a 0.5 speed or something like that that you can select, and that will slow it down so that it'll be normal speed. But this is twice the normal speed. So I decided that saucer was a little bit too thick on the bottom there. Not quite so much of that was showing, so I just went in with a little bit more of the burnt umber and made a little shadow, and then I kind of used that up in the saucer itself to kind of firm up that line. And now I've got some of that light ultramarine blue that I've added to my brush, and I'm just kind of brushing some of that in there too. And picking up some green to darken up and kind of define that outer edge of the cup handle. And now I just kind of, sometimes when I have a color like that that might look okay in the background, I'll just kind of use up the rest of the paint. That's what I did there. I just kind of brushed it off onto the background. And that actually helps unify your painting too, so it's good. So now I picked up some of the raw sienna, and I still had kind of that gray blue in my brush, So it is mixing with the raw sienna and making this kind of a grayish brown. I'm just filling in my book, and there's just a tiny bit of that book underneath peeking through. And I decided after I painted this that you'll notice that the angle of the book is a little bit off. I'm not sure if I mentioned this already, but I ended up correcting it after the video. So just make sure that when you're doing this that you get that your left and right edges of that top part of your book going in the same direction. And in this case, that line closest to you is slightly curved down too much. So when I corrected it, I just went back in with some of this color that I'm using and lifted that edge a little bit, and then used some of the green to kind of touch up the outer border too. And then went back in with the blue of the book. Fortunately, acrylics are pretty easy to adjust like that, so and that's pretty common for me to kind of adjust my composition after the fact. So I don't kind of worry too much about it while I'm working. Sometimes that just happens, and I don't like to fuss over it too much while I'm painting because I really like to be able to just kind of get into the flow. But you may want to be a little bit more careful when you're doing yours so you don't have to go back and fix it like I did. And I'm using a little bit of that brown up in the teacup too, just to give it a little bit of those colors picked up from the books again. So now I'm picking up some of that Cadmium Red Light and some burnt umber, made a kind of a soft red for the center of my flowers, and picking up some Hansa Yellow Light and Azo Yellow to do the undertone in my yellow rose. If you don't have Azo Yellow, you could use probably Cad Yellow or Cad Yellow Deep if you had it. It's got a little bit of an undertone of orange to it at full strength, but it's very vibrant when it's mixed with white. It's a very vibrant yellow, so it's kind of an interesting color. Good one to have. Now I've switched to my angle brush here, and I've got, this is just plain old white, and I'm starting to draw in my rose. Now at this point, if you wanted to, before you did this, if you don't want to draw it freehand, you could go in with a pencil or a light watercolor pencil, or you could transfer on, if you drew it out on paper, you could trace your lines in with like a white graphite so that you could see where to put your lines. There's just a lot of folded petals. This rose in particular is I think it's called a hybrid tea rose, and it has very angular petals. So the outer petals are, once they're open, they look rounded, but the inner petals are all folded in on themselves. So there's all these kind of sharp corners and edges. So just kind of keep that in mind when you're painting it. You should see these little angles like that triangle shape there at the top. And some of them I'm mainly just wanting to put in the areas that are the brightest, so the very tips of the petals. So look at your picture and just kind of pick out where the ends of each one of those petals lays, and that's where I'm putting this white, where the especially the ones in the front there, they're gonna be coming straight up at you, so the light's hitting them. And now I'm picking up a little bit of raw sienna and some of the brilliant yellow green, like a soft green color, and I'm going into some of my shadow areas and transitioning between that white and the background color. Don't cover over all your background at this point. You want to still kind of see that through, and I'm just kind of adding another layer of color. And you'll notice with these roses, I didn't intend to do this painting as like a straight up tutorial, so I probably made it a little bit more complicated than I would have if I had not just been doing it for myself. So this is, you're seeing here is my process of working out the colors and working out, you know, what I'm actually seeing in that and what colors I should use. So now I'm picking up a little bit of phthalo green to make a little bit brighter green, and then adding a little bit of the I think browns. I'm just kind of making a yeah, kind of a neutral green with a little bit of blue tones in it, and using that for another darker shadow area. And now if you'll notice, I'm going up against my white, so I'm going right up on the other side of my brightest white areas. So, but like I was saying, this, if you want to simplify this, the second rose that I do, the smaller one, white one, you might do this larger rose sort of the way I did that one, and it's got fewer colors in it. It's less detailed. So that's just up to you. Or you could maybe change it to a cabbage rose and do it sort of like I do the red cabbage rose, make it a white one, but, you know, change it. So it's up to you. You know, you can do it however you want to. I just I might have simplified this a little bit if I had planned on teaching it, but I had a few people asking in my Thankful Art group on Facebook, asking to know how to paint it, so I'm going to do my best to explain what I did here. But it's kind of add a little bit of this and then add a little bit of that and then add a little bit of more white back over it, and you'll see it's probably a 12-step process here. So now I'm adding some yellow green highlights, and these are kind of going right up next to the white highlights. And I've added some more white to this same color, and I'm going kind of over the top of some of my bright areas of highlight to add a little bit other color in there, adding back a little bit of white. And you'll just see, you know, how I work. I kind of just work back and forth, and I have very light touches, so I'm not like wanting to go solid with these colors. I'm just kind of very lightly tapping and blending as I go. I put a lot of color on, and then I use the tip of my brush and very gently push it around, and that kind of helps move it where I want it to go. So now I'm picking up some raw sienna and a little tiny bit of the cad red, and I'm adding some warmer shadows, working in some of this color to my composition. So I'll add a dark color, and then I'll come back in with the white, and then you'll see this process over and over again. I kind of cover over part of the white, and then I'll come back in and clean it back up, and then do another color, and then come back in with the white again. And so it's kind of just a back and forth. It's not a super straightforward process, so it's kind of hard to teach it, but it's really fun. So, you know, but mainly what I'm doing is I'm looking at the picture, and I'm just trying to kind of evaluate what I'm seeing in those shadows, what colors are in there, and then trying to kind of add those in while retaining my composition, or the integrity of the drawing. So you'll notice, like, after a while I've blended in some of these colors, and the outlines of my petals are starting to get a little muddied or, you know, indistinct. So then I'll come back in with a darker color and outline them again. So, and then I do that a couple of times here. But white is a tricky color to paint because it doesn't, what do I say it now? I'm coming in with some gray blue here. And I'm sorry I can't see my palette, so I don't remember exactly what colors I'm using, but I think I had a little bit of that green on my brush and picked up some of that blue, light ultramarine blue. And the light ultramarine blue, if you don't have it, you can just mix some white with ultramarine and make it, that's all it is. So it's just in a tube form, so it makes it faster to use, because I use it quite a lot with, especially on this painting. So here I'm kind of adjusting my composition there. You notice I covered over part of the petal there to adjust the shape. I had gotten it a little bit too big on that side. So just come in with the green, the darker green there, and made it smaller. And now I'm adding some shadows underneath the rose onto the greenery. And I just added some either black or burnt umber to the hooker's green to make it a nice dark color there. And then I grabbed some burnt umber with the red again and putting back in my centers of my flowers. And then using a little bit of this with the Alizarin Crimson and burnt umber and making a dark red for the center of that upper red rose there. And I'm not wanting to put in, you know, any shapes that are too recognizable, especially on those cabbage roses at the top. I want to keep them fairly random, so keep that in mind. Okay, so now I'm coming back in with some of that bright yellow green again. That's just a mixture of the yellow green and one of my probably Hansa Yellow Light with white to soften it up a little bit. And I'm just trying to make sure that I'm not covering up over my white petals too much there. But, you know, this may seem very tedious and a lot of steps, but it really does help the depth of it. You just kind of have to know when to stop, and otherwise you can really muddy it up. So it's kind of a fine balance. Now I've got a little tiny bit of the red in with the green, and it's made this kind of a brown, orangey brown color, brownish green. Using the opposites colors on the color wheel, so red and green are opposite on the color wheel. Those will neutralize one another if you use them, mix them. Picked up some white with that color, and I'm just going back over. Like I said, there's a lot of back and forth with the whites. But each time I do a new layer, you'll notice I kind of choose a different area of the petal. I don't cover over the entire section, and I don't want to cover up all of what I've already got there. So I'm really selective about where I kind of place these colors so that they're not competing with each other, but they're all kind of showing up in different areas of that petal. If that makes sense. So and all these different layers really do kind of start to build it up and create depth and yeah, so. And sometimes, you know, if you're frustrated and you're struggling with it, you know, sometimes it just helps to kind of set it aside and work on a different area. So if you get and you've got, you know, this rose going, and you've decided that it's kind of giving you fits, then you can just kind of set it aside for a minute and come back to it. I'm adding a little bit of warm orangey, very, very little bit of that center color that I put back in there, that orangey brown, and I've added white to it so that it's like a warm highlight, and I've added a little bit of that on there. Now I've got Phthalo Green with the white, and I'm adding some of that. So these white petals are picking up not only, you know, are their own centers, maybe a little bit of yellow tones, but they're picking up the colors around them just like the teacup does. So there's some greens down in there. There's a little bit of blue. There's some of the orangey or pinks from the flowers around them. There's a lot of colors that you can use with whites, just as long as you keep them soft. There's not, if you looked at this picture in black and white, there's not a lot of value change. So there's not a really dark contrast in the shadows of the white flowers. So that's how you have to really kind of be careful and not do any of these shadow areas too dark. You want them dark enough, but you definitely don't want to overpower your white with a really super dark shadow. The center of the rose is the darkest area for sure. Okay, so now I'm picking up some pink. I've got the light magenta, and I'm using Alizarin Crimson with white. And so I've got a couple different varying shades of pink there. And just kind of picking up more of the Cad Red Light and the Alizarin Crimson. As I go toward the center, it's getting darker. And just refer to your picture and kind of see where the dark areas are catching and where the light areas are. And they go in kind of a circular motion, so those petals are kind of coming around the outside, and the ones in the center there are close together, and then the ones on the outer edges are a little bit longer. Don't know if that made sense at all, but now with this pink rose, I fussed with this one a little bit more than I probably needed to, and you can do as much or as little with this as you need to. So I was trying to get it to be sort of semi-realistic, but you could keep it really light and just do a few little brush strokes and be done with it. So you can see here where I'm using the flat edge of my brush in some places, and then using the corner edge or the tip of it to draw in lines too. So I'm using this angle brush, and I've got the light magenta mostly with a little bit of the white mixed in some places. And so, I mean, I'm getting to a point here in a little bit where you could probably stop and it looks really cool, and you could leave it and it would be very like impressionistic looking. But like I said, I kind of kept fussing with it a little bit to get a little bit closer to the picture. It's a little bit hard to tell with this rose because the petals were kind of folded over each other in an odd way. It was just kind of hard to see where the dark and lights were, because there wasn't a lot of contrast on it. And I've started with a fairly dark color. I probably could have done my undertone a shade lighter. Now I'm adding a little bit of yellow to, I still had that pink in there, so I've just made it kind of an orangey white, and putting that in to some of my highlight areas. Going back in with some of the darker pink, picking up some of the Alizarin Crimson to do that. And some white to make some highlights and kind of try to shape these flowers. Kind of makes a bowl shape, so if you kind of keep that in mind, that's probably pretty close to what you want. This center is kind of dipped down low. It doesn't protrude. The outer petals are up higher than the center. Okay, so now I picked up a little bit of the light ultramarine blue for my shadow area. It makes it kind of a purpley shadow. And I tried out that pink there, but I didn't want that in the rose. I decided it was too much, so I just took a wet cloth, and because that was still wet or dry underneath, it didn't damage my painting. So as long as that the white rose was dry, you can wipe off your paint if you try something and you don't like it. So now I've got Alizarin Crimson and the Cad Red Light and a little bit of yellow. Made kind of a salmony orange color. And made it a little bit darker by picking up some more of the Alizarin Crimson in it. I'm just laying in a few dots and dashes for the center of that flower to make it a little bit darker. And adding a little bit of this color into the red rose. Now picking up some of that bright pink, the light magenta. I don't know if I mentioned this, but the light magenta could be mixed with alizarin crimson and white if you don't have it. So I've kind of mixed a little bit of yellow back into those colors and some white to make a peach color. And I kind of just played with this one, just trying to get my colors right and see where I wanted my highlights to go here. I had to add some more white. Yeah, I use a lot of white in this painting, a lot more than maybe normal. And I've got my number 4 round now. Or no, I've switched to a Filbert brush. That's what I decided. Decided I didn't like the way that the angle brush was making the edges of the petals a little bit sharp. So the Filbert is going to help with that. It'll make the edges of your petals a lot softer and more rounded. So now I'm putting in some of those really bright highlights with the white. It's muddied up a little bit with the pinks that I had, but it's very bright. It's one of my brightest highlights here. I'm just placing it around the outside edges of that kind of bowl shape. And picking up a little bit more of the deeper pink for some highlights on the inside of the bowl. And yeah, just decided to go ahead and soften up all of that outer edge because it was still a little bit too dark. So like I said, I probably could have started with a shade lighter on the outer edges, and that would have helped save this step because that pink was such a light color, and so I was trying to get it back down to that color. So I was kind of fighting it this whole time, trying to get the pink soft enough to where I liked it. So yeah, this one I fussed with it quite a bit more than I probably would have normally done if I had started with the lighter color. And now I'm adding a little bit more of the darker magenta back in just strategic places. Picking up a little of the Cad Red Light to add some of that. And some white with the Cad Red Light. So all of these different colors will just help tell a story. You know, when you get them all kind of in there, your eye they'll all sort of blend in your eye, and I don't know, it just makes your paintings much more interesting if you for me, I like having all these colors playing off each other, and so like using this pink and the yellow flower, you might not seem like something you might think to do, but it will help unify your painting. So, and now I'm going back in with a little bit of the green. There's a lot of green in this yellow rose. It's that brilliant yellow green. I kind of cleaned out my brush and picked up some of the Hansa Yellow Light with white. And now I'm blending back over the green areas that I laid in. If you do this quickly enough, it's, you know, I like to lay in kind of a thick area of paint, like I did with the green, and then switch to another color that I want to blend into it. And then very lightly, you can just see my kind of flicking over the top of it with that yellow, and it will sort of blend out my edges. It's not really dry brushing because my yellow is very thick too, but because that green is thick underneath, they will blend just slightly where they touch, and that way I don't have to overwork it, because the more you mess with it while you're blending, sometimes the muddier it'll get and you'll lose your dark areas. You know, I'm not going over the dark green altogether. In some areas I'm just kind of touching into it slightly. So, and then I decided here in a minute that the center of the rose was getting too far down. It's closer to the edge, so I moved it. And I've got some of that peachy color that I mixed for the roses that I'm picking up too, and using some of that peachy white for some of my highlights. Kind of outlining my flowers, petals here. This was a cabbage rose, this yellow one, so it wasn't, it didn't look like a regular bud that maybe a tea rose would look like. It kind of had more oddly shaped petals. Like it was kind of hard to see where they started and stopped. There's so many petals in those cabbage roses that they look like a cabbage. That really, I know why they're named that, because they have, you know, it's like if you think lettuce, you know, there's just like so many layers on the inside when they open up. So the buds are not, they're kind of this round bowl, or like a round shape. So now I'm adding in some darker green to that area where the baby's breath is, and some darker shadows. And that was just the Hansa, or the hooker's green with some burnt umber or black, either one. And I've got the Alizarin Crimson, full strength here. Just adding some nice dark areas into my roses. And then I've used that Alizarin Crimson and picked up a little bit of the light ultramarine blue to make this kind of a purpley tone for some shadows. That'll help, that having that shadow at the bottom of that rose will really help push it back and make it look like it's sitting in behind that white rose. Without that, it looks like it's kind of floating on top of it. Going back in with some brighter white. Still have some yellow in it. And using that also in my white rose. You thought we were done with it, did you? We're not done. So this is that creamy yellow. And I'm just going over my highlight areas. Yeah, so not all of it, just in little certain areas and blending onto the brightest areas of my rose. And now picking up straight white. I'm going back in and popping back in some of these really bright highlight areas. And really you could save this to the very end and just do your brightest highlight at the very end after you, but because of the way that I paint this, you kind of need to be able to see where those petals go, you know, so every time you add your shadows or whatever. I'm adding a little tiny bit of the pink or yellow, the highlight colors from my pink rose into my bright areas now too. So it's starting to come together. The white rose was definitely the most detailed, even in the picture. The rest of the roses in the background and even the teacup itself were a little bit softer, out of focus slightly, but the white rose there was definitely the focal point, so I wanted to make sure that I gave it a lot of detail. This is a green that I've mixed up. It's I think it was the light ultramarine blue and the turquoise color. Okay, now I've got some white and light magenta. Just putting some bright highlights in my red rose there. And picking up some Alizarin Crimson, going back over those to soften them up just a little bit. That's a really good trick. You know, if you get your highlights too bright, just go back over with the wash or just a light coverage of another color, and you'll still be able to see them, but you can neutralize them a little bit. And so now I've got some of the light cadmium red and the raw sienna brightened up that center. I still haven't moved the center of the yellow flower yet, but I will do that here in a minute. It's coming. Now I've mixed in some more purple with the blue and the alizarin crimson. I think it's ultramarine blue and alizarin crimson. And I'm just really drawing in, making that nice and dark there. Putting a little bit of it in the red. And now I've got the light ultramarine blue on an angle brush, and I'm using it very carefully to draw in some shadowed areas, and it's only on the tip of the angle brush. So you've seen me do this in some of my other videos. If you load just the tip of it, you can kind of control where your shadows go, and they blend out easier for you. So you just put your, oops, and my center wasn't dry there, so to kind of fix it. I'm just fixing it real quick. Pick up some yellow. brightening up my yellow flower with some brighter yeah, this is where I cover it. This is where I decided why I wasn't liking what was going on with the yellow. I just decided to move that center up a little higher. And just pick up some white and pop right over it. Some of the white and the yellow there, and just kind of redefining where I want that, and picking up some of the darker red to define the center of it. Okay, so now I've picked up some white and I've got my angle brush. This is a small angle brush. And here again, I'm doing it just like the other rows. I'm putting my lightest, my brightest areas. I'm drawing in my rose shapes. And just turning my brush this way and that to create my petals, using the picture as a reference. Trying not to cover over all of my undercoat, but defining those outer edges of each petal. Now pick up some green yellow, mostly yellow, on just the tip and working that into some of my shadowed areas, and we're kind of the transition between the white and the shadows. And now I've picked up some light ultramarine blue, and it's mixed with that yellow to make this kind of a gray-green color for the shadows. And now I'm going over some of my darkest areas with this color. And so, like I said before, you could do your main yellow flower this way, the way I'm doing this side one, and save a few thousand steps. And now I've got the brilliant yellow-green on the very tip of my angle brush here. And I'm just plopping down little random dots, not covering over all of it. I don't want, and using the very tip of it to do some very thin lines in my leaf there. When you're doing the dots for the baby breath, you want to leave that those darker areas in between some of them so that you can see. Now I've got some ivory yellow that I had mixed up before. It's kind of white with the yellows, and I'm just touching in a few little very, very small, very light touches. If you want to, you could switch to a liner brush if you're having trouble getting these light dots with the angle brush, but I'm not wanting them touching necessarily. Some of them will touch, but now I'm picking up the brightest white and going over some of the dots with the brightest white. Okay, so now this was the fun part for me. I really liked doing this on the teacup. So very, very, very loosely, using the tip of my brush, I've got Phthalo Blue, and I'm just lightly, it's kind of watered down a little bit, so it's not full strength phthalo. I'm lightly sketching in the details of the teacup decoration. It's very detailed, so I'm just looking at it almost like unfocused and trying to see where the outlines of some of those shapes are, where the brightest, or darkest areas really in this case of that dark blue, and just kind of trying to mimic that just a little bit. So leaving it's almost like a lace pattern. I'm leaving a lot of the undercolor showing through, and I'm just kind of tapping and outlining little sections randomly. You keep it very random and keep it light, and sort of let your edges go fuzzy, and it'll look unfocused like this. You don't want to get it, you don't want perfect straight lines is what I'm saying. You know, you want to keep a very, very light touch on your brush while you're doing this, and it will help kind of with that illusion of kind of fuzziness. So no clean edges is what I'm. So, which makes this fun because you can kind of just, you know, you don't have to worry too much if you sort of get a little section that's a little, you know, not exactly like the teacup. And I had to go look and see what the rest of the teacup looked like, so I found another reference photo on the Fabulous blog that was taken in the same photo shoot, and kind of used that to see what that other side of that teacup looked like underneath that leaf, because I made the leaf a lot smaller than it is in the picture. And that's just like an artistic liberty that I took. You know, you kind of have artistic license. It's your painting. You can change things if you want to. But sometimes it helps if you have a reference photo when you do that, because otherwise it can kind of mess up your painting, make it unrealistic. I have a white now. I'm just using straight up white, and I'm adding back in some brighter highlights on that rose in the background, and then going back in and softening up some of those edges with a light green, like a phthalo green with some white. And now I'm going back over the top of that to set that rose back in on itself. Kind of helps have makes that illusion a little bit more realistic, to have some of those details set back in with some dots. Okay, now I've picked up, I've got a number 2 round, and I'm picking up the light ultramarine blue mixed with white. It's mostly white, and I'm just very lightly tapping over the top. I'm not wanting to cover up all of this teal blue that or this beautiful aqua we've got, and I'm leaving a lot of it in between the darker blue and these highlights. So leaving that color in there really helps the illusion too. But some of these areas are really bright, so I'm kind of going in and around all of my little decorations, and just kind of brightening up my white teacup here. And I didn't do this first because I wanted that aqua color. I wanted that aqua color showing, and if I tried to do the white first and then did the dark blue over the top, you would have lost all of that aqua color. And now I'm switching over to a 1/2 inch flat, and I've got some of the light ultramarine blue, and I'm putting in that a little bit darker along that bottom edge and blending it back up into the white with some white. And laying it on thick, then picking up some white and blending back over it while it's still wet. Laying down the white thickly, and picking up the ultramarine blue and going back over it. So it's kind of blend as you go, little sections at a time. And leaving a lot of that aqua color showing through in places, so it's not a solid coat. I'm working on the handle some, putting a little bit more of the shadows along the bottom edge of the handle and the underside of the top of the handle. Does that make sense? And adding a little bit of this blue and white down into the saucer now. And very light touches, kind of random brush strokes, just tapping and blending, picking up a little bit of the darker blue, that phthalo blue, or just a little bit of that detail shows in the bottom of the teacup. It's definitely not as dark as the upper areas. And so I'm using that same color to kind of unify that top area of the teacup too. Those decorations are kind of blending back over them a little bit to soften up some of the edges. And the saucer here has a lot of reflected light, so it's a lot more kind of green, especially on the bottom. It's not the same exact colors as the teacup itself. Because it's laying flat and it's, open, it's not facing you as much. So the only part that's facing you is really the front edge of that saucer. I'm picking a little bit of white, and I'm just kind of working out where my highlights are. The highlight areas, since the light source is coming from the back of the teacup, it's only really catching on the rim of the saucer. The rest of it is pretty well shadowed. So that area there has got the brightest highlight, and a little bit on the inside of the saucer and the front edge of the saucer facing you. And every time I introduce a new color into the bottom area, I try to put a little bit of it in the upper teacup too, so that they don't look like two separate entities. I'm just picking up a little bit of white and I'm just really kind of very carefully adding more white to this. I don't want to overwhelm it, so I was kind of very slowly adding in more and more white until I got it to where I wanted it to be, because it's really not a straight white piece. There's only a couple areas where it's really white. The rest of it is all kind of blues and greens and shadows, pale pastel colors, grays and things. So sometimes I'm picking up a little tiny bit of the yellow, picking up a little bit of that light ultramarine blue underneath here, adding a little bit of that into the shadow area, cleaning up that top edge of the saucer so that it looks correct. Now I've got a little bit darker. I've added some phthalo blue with white, and I use that to outline it there. And then now I've got the phthalo blue, and I'm going back underneath and adding a nice dark shadow on that saucer underneath where it's touching the book. It's quite dark, and then adding just a few little indications of some darkness with the corner of my brush, keeping it very random. Just using the tip corner of my brush to just kind of tap back over some of this dark phthalo up into this teacup too. Now I've picked up some green, and I'm just putting in some of that green into the saucer there and blending out some of that dark phthalo green or dark phthalo blue that I'd put in there, softening it up a little bit and cleaning up the edge of the saucer there. going back over some of those areas with white where I feel like it got a little bit too dark. It's just kind of back and forth and back and forth. You can see there's multiple steps. Like you can make it as simplified as you want to. You don't have to do all of what I did here. I like to have lots of different layers. I feel like it adds a lot. This is definitely a fine art painting though. It's not a simplified version at all. So you can kind of see how much, how many steps go into this sort of a process. But the results are really nice because there's all these different layers of color going on. So I'll pick up a little bit warmer white now. Going in with some really bright areas there. Got a little too much, so I wiped it back off. And picking up that shadow color, that light ultramarine blue. And tapping in. Okay, now I decided to go ahead and brighten up some of those little areas on the teacup. So I've got some white on the corner of this brush. And I'm just tapping in over the top of some of those areas on my decoration to brighten them up. Picking up some more of that bright white. And now I've added a little bit of, just a tiny bit of yellow into that. I still had a lot of that light ultramarine blue in my brush. And I'm just adding some dots to my background. Now I picked up the brilliant yellow green. If you don't have brilliant yellow, just add yellow to phthalo green and you'll get a close proximity to this with some white. There's some turquoise. I'm adding a little bit of that up into my background. That'll help unify the painting. And I decided to kind of do a wash. So I wet down some of this color and decided to kind of just add it to some of the other areas of the background to kind of gray it out a little bit. Now I've added some yellow. And doing this wash technique will leave all of the brush strokes visible, but it just kind of changes the tone. It's like putting a filter on a painting or a photograph or something like that. By washing over the top, you're just changing the color without changing the detail too much. All the brush strokes are still showing and stuff. Now I'm kind of just cleaning up around the edge of my teacup, making sure that it's nice and dark around the outside edges, just so that it really pops. Felt like it was kind of blending into the background a little bit too much, so I'm going back in with some darker, like hooker's green, and doing that there. This is the yellow green. I'm just softening up some of the background. And really, you don't have to do this. This is just me being fussy. So here's the hooker's green that I'm. This I think is really important though, because really sets that painting, those flowers forward when you put this shadow color behind them. And I have it just on the corner of my brush. So the one half is got the lighter yellow, and then the corner has the darker green. Now I'm tapping in where my foliage is that we covered over, and just using the edge of it to kind of draw and tap in some shapes for the foliage on this side too. Picking up some of the yellowy green. And going back in with the really dark. And just using the corner and edges of the brush to do dots. Corner of the flat brush to do some really nice random leaf shapes. Don't get too detailed with it. And now I've got my number 4 round, I believe, and some yellow green. And I'm just drawing in my eucalyptus leaf stems. And I'm sorry I kind of go off camera on a little bit of this, so I apologize in advance. I'm using a combination of Turquoise Deep, light ultramarine blue, and Phthalo Blue, I think, white, a little tiny bit of yellow, maybe. It's all off camera, so I can't really remember, but I'm just kind of making a gray blue-green color, and that, using the turquoise and the ultramarine blue, light ultramarine blue, kind of creates that color. And then adding white to it to make the highlights and things will help. So, like I said, I didn't realize I was off camera here. There we go. I wiped it off anyway, so. This, since I didn't sketch it in, I decided to kind of change from the picture a little bit. I added a little bit more leaf detail to the eucalyptus leaves on that side. I wanted a little bit more of that blue-green color on that side too. So there we go. Now I'm going back in with that brilliant yellow-green and adding a little bit more highlight. It's the brilliant yellow, but it's also got a lot of that blue in it. So it's grayed down quite a bit. It's not as vibrant. And I'm not being super detailed with this because this is not my focal point. So but I'm wanting to get a little bit of value change in there. This is a burnt umber. Putting a little bit of that in for the stem. This is sort of brown. And then using it in the foliage on that side. Just tapping a few places. And now I've got brilliant yellow green and some white. And some raw sienna to make these highlights on the stems. And I decided to use some of that color in my rose. Here again, every time I introduce a new color, I want to kind of use it somewhere else. So I decided to pick up just a tiny bit in the rose itself there would help. Just a couple little places. And decided to use it a little bit over on the other side too. So it's the raw sienna and the brilliant yellow green with a little bit of white. I've picked up a little bit more of the turquoise and white and making a highlight on my eucalyptus here. Just refer to your picture, see where the light's catching the flowers. Add a little bit into my foliage. I'm switching brushes. I've got the Filbert there, and I'm adding a really dark shadow of the turquoise and light ultramarine, and some white there to just kind of soften it up. Then adding that color down into the saucer. And now I'm going to use that same color. So it's the Turquoise Deep and Unbleached Titanium makes this kind of a gray blue, gray turquoise, and maybe a tiny bit of green, but I don't remember if I added a little bit of the Phthalo Green to it. I might have. Yeah, I think I did. Just a teeny tiny bit. So the brightest part is there on the top. So I'm just highlighting the top edge of that book there on the end, and then going back in with that Turquoise Deep on my shadow. Picking up some Phthalo Blue there, laying in a nice dark shadow of the Phthalo Blue. Adding a little bit of that and to the book shadow. And dry brushing a little bit on the teacup saucer there. Having that really dark shadow will help your perspective too. Now I'm adding it to the bottom edge of my book there. This is the Phthalo Blue. And you can cut it with a little bit of the Turquoise Blue too. So the darkest area is right up underneath where that book is sitting, and then it gets lighter as it goes toward the top. So I'm just kind of doing light brush strokes, basically dry brushing it at this point. Now I've picked up some white, added some white to it to lay in a few highlights along the edges of the book. And I didn't distress this book. The original picture has the end of the book here all, distressed and beat up, but I wasn't sure how it would translate to the painting because the painting was so sort of impressionist. I didn't want to try to make it look distressed because I was just afraid it wouldn't translate very well. So now I've got raw sienna with a little bit of unbleached titanium, and I'm just going to make some lines in the end of my book here. Got some dark burnt umber. Laying in some of that, dry brushing it, letting it catch the texture of the canvas. Putting some shadow on that book underneath. Okay, going back in. So these colors on the end of the book are raw sienna, white, unbleached titanium, not necessarily white, but unbleached titanium and burnt umber are my main three colors for that. So I'm using the green, the hooker's green, to clean up the edge of the book there. I decided that it got too long on that one side, and then I did end up, after this painting, after I finished recording, I ended up actually adjusting it even more than this. But this is, you can see how it's done. So you just kind of go back in with a dark color and then lay some of the lighter color over the top of that and make sure it's nice and opaque, and it'll just cover right up over what you've painted. And helps fuzz out your edges too. And I decided to push back that corner book, that underneath book, so that the edge of the book on top was kind of hanging over the outside edge of it, like in the picture. Okay, now I've got the raw sienna and a little bit of unbleached titanium, and I'm painting in, just dabbing so that a little bit of that blue is still showing through in the label on the book here. Don't get too super fussy with it, just kind of keep it light and light brush strokes. And now I'm going back in with a little bit of the darker raw sienna and putting back in some dark areas on the bottom edges and here and there. Adding it to the book. And now I've got some light, some unbleached titanium here, and I'm just streaking it on the end of the book there to create some illusion of pages. Use the tip of it and run it sideways there to do some like little parallel stripes. As long as you keep them kind of going in the same direction, correct direction, the same direction as the edges of the top edges of the book, and keep them parallel, it'll kind of give you the illusion of the pages there. Adding a little bit of that color to my label. And I just keep going back and forth with these pages, different varying shades of raw sienna, unbleached titanium, and the burnt umber to kind of build up layers. Now I've got burnt umber here, and I've loaded it just on the tip of my brush, very dry, so that it's really just streaking. And the brush is all fuzzed out and it's got very little paint in it, so I'm using that fuzziness of it here, and I'm going to tap it to create the illusion of some writing or something on my label, and that darker shadow on the bottom edge of it. Just using the corners and edges of that. That's all you need to do. And we're almost done. I'm going to add a little bit darker shadow there to clean that back up with the burnt umber. Darken those shadows underneath really dark. I believe that was the Phthalo Blue that I'm using there with an angle brush. That was probably burnt umber since I used it on the book. But okay, so we're almost done. I picked up a little bit of the bright yellow green, and I'm adding some highlights in my foliage. It's actually like yellow and white. Adding a little bit more detail to the leaf, picking up a little bit of the darker green, and just defining that leaf a little bit. And then using the brilliant yellow green to tap in a few more of the little baby's breath details over the top of that leaf. And some white too. Now I'm just using the brilliant yellow green and some dabbing on a few little random dots here and there in the background. Kind of make it look like there's stuff going on. And really, you don't have to do this step if you've already done this a few times. So I just felt like I needed to because I had kind of lost a few of my details. And that's about it. So I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. I hope it made sense. I know it's super complicated, but I think it's totally doable. You can definitely simplify it if you don't want to do all the steps that I did. But thank you so much for watching today. Hope you enjoyed it. See you next time. Bye-bye. Please subscribe and share it with your friends too. Thanks.